So I'd like to introduce you to our first guest. His name is John Tuccillo. John is the Senior Vice President of Industry and Government Affairs, leading Schneider Electric's collaborative advancements with global industry consortia, standards organizations, and contributing to the dialogue with governmental policy and regulators worldwide. So welcome, John. Thanks for joining us here.
Hey, Dean, glad to be here. I'm really excited about this. And hello to all our friends from all around the world. And I saw a number of familiar names starting to pop up.
Yeah, I say Henry from Intel before, yeah, like all types Henry. Of people. Yeah, yep. So John,
hey,
Zal's on as well. Yeah, it's like a community here. It's a very small world.
Yeah, no
even though we're in such a big place. Yes. Yeah. So John, I don't remember if you remember where we met. It was at the New York Stock Exchange. You were the chairman of the Green Grid, and you were ringing the bell.
Yeah,
I can't believe that was a decade ago.
A little grayer now. But that was really, it was a great day. It really was a great day. I remember how the financial community was reacting to the work that we were advancing together as a community. It was just positive on every front. It was great. I remember you sitting there taking pictures.
Yep, I was on the floor watching you guys up there ringing the bell. That was very neat, being on the advisory council. It's interesting that now you look at, we're over a decade from that day, and the work's continuing. You know, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I want to first go into, back in February, I asked if you would join a few of the key iMasons leaders to help define the industry sustainability strategy. And we'll get to that in a minute as well. But first, a pandemic question. Because of what you do, you have a very unique perspective. You've told me that COVID has been a wake-up call for the public sector globally. Why is that?
The wake-up call is really the best way I think I can express it, because the things that we've been addressing for over a decade have moved front and center, right? So the general public now understands the criticality of sustainability. They understand the reliance on digital technologies for both economic security, personal security, and environmental security. So it's front and center. And whenever things go front and center, governments decide it's time to act. And they have very quickly and very deeply. The things we've been sharing with governments for all these better years, I kind of group it into one thing I call IT for good. And because it demonstrates how, as all of these technologies work together, they will significantly improve the economic condition. They will provide societal improvements. And through the efforts of the industry, working with academia, with governments, and across all industries, we've significantly reduced the impact. Now, we knew that, but now with the shutdowns and the quarantines, everybody sees it too. So governments are looking for ways to recover quickly, but I'll get into that later.
Yeah, and that to me is very interesting, because we've never had the public stage like this before, where the entire world really realizes the digital infrastructure underneath there is allowing the world to function.
That's right.
Without it, the world would stop. And that's just a that's a crazy
true.
Thing.
It's absolutely true, and governments are recognizing that, right? So they understand the thin thread that many of them find themselves on right now, because they hadn't taken these things into account early on.
Right.
Or what is the economic prosperity that can be sustained through digital innovation, or as I call IT for agriculture. Agriculture right now has become critical to so many different communities. Can you imagine if we hadn't made the advancements we made in supporting agriculture? I mean, working from home, learning from home, data centers are under tremendous stress, and that's understandable and appreciable. So governments are taking actions. I'm on the phone all day, every day, into the night, helping governments figure out a path forward.
Got it. So there's quite a bit of brainstorming going on. That brings two different questions up for me. Has the pandemic really changed the priorities for these government leaders? And then again, now that the things are beginning to slowly return, which countries do you think are going to recover most quickly?
So if I had a crystal ball, I would have won Powerball. Bye.
Yeah.
Or lotto, as our friends in Europe call it. I think there's a couple of real fundamental aspects of this. Every government, everywhere, is looking at ways to recover as quickly as they can.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them, particularly the EU, and we can talk about that later, but they're keeping sustainability at the center because they realize that they have a unique opportunity. In fact, just this morning, I got, I don't know if you can see this, I got this week's Economist.
Seize the moment.
Yep.
Wow.
This is the chance to flatten the climate curve.
Wow.
All right, front cover story.
Yep. You just can't miss it. I mean, you look out the window and you
Absolutely.
see the difference when it comes down to the climate, right?
Yes, everywhere. But you know, some governments are really forced with I call it a bifurcation of the things that they're trying to balance. Economic recovery, human security and health and well-being, number one, absolutely number one. Yet they understand that the general public as well as institutions are recognizing that, holy cow, look what happened. You know, they've got in rivers, oceans, streams, wildlife coming back that hadn't been there in decades.
Yeah.
They see the skies brightening. You look at the really great work that Google and NASA have been doing on measuring the atmospheric contaminants and how, as a result of the quarantines, that's been significantly reduced. So do I think that we're going to flip the switch and be able to achieve nirvana? Heck no. No way. I'd like to, but no. Yeah. But they see the path. They see the path forward. And it's now not just those of us in the industry working towards this. The public now understands it. I remember a conversation you and I had once, by the way. We were sitting there. We said, we need to figure out a way to make sustainability sexy. Because right now, it's not. And look at now. I wouldn't go so far as to say sexy, but what's happened is that people are like, holy cow, look at what we can do. So there's a path, and it's very similar to the path we've been building, and that's going to help to institute significant change.
Yeah. Yeah. And you touched on a couple of things there about the economic aspects of it. You know, I think of a decade ago, how difficult it would be to support all of the shipping and the other things that, you know, Amazon does every day, as does Walmart and all the other bigger companies that are allowing people, right, to do that. Same thing with, say, Uber Eats or Grubhub or any other food delivery service that didn't exist at scale before.
Right.
So digital infrastructure is is delivering, and the fact that they've been able to absorb this growth.
Yes.
You know, the thing that scares me is I think they've picked the low-hanging fruit. They had extra capacity. Now it comes down to sustaining this and going forward. Exactly. You know, we had Noelle Walson from Microsoft earlier, and she was saying they turned up 100 megawatts of capacity in 2 weeks.
Yes.
2 weeks. It's just unprecedented, you know?
And there are some in government who understand what that means.
Right.
And I think one of the beautiful things about what we're trying to do here together with the sustainability strategy is that we need to help educate those who haven't been exposed yet.
Yeah.
Who don't understand what that means, both to capacity, to overall sustainable growth, yet as environmentally friendly as possible. In fact, I think it was yesterday, it could have been early this morning, Frans Timmermans of the EU made a speech where he was talking about those who keep their focus on sustainability versus those who don't. And those who don't are not going to receive as much support from the government on their recovery plans. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is. It's not just about the economics, it's the ecology of it all.
Right.
Yeah,
right. They understand the economics, but I not enough really understand the implications on capacity. Tariq Rahman does, and that's a whole nother story.
Right.
And he became proactive, very proactive on day one, where he was like, he comes from our industry, so he understands what this was going to mean for capacity. what
Yeah.
it meant for data exchanges, how to prioritize what type of critical data when, how
Yep.
to make sure the pipes stay open to give the data center and the IT community enough time to ramp up their capacity. He was trying to throttle back a little bit on demand, and he did it successfully.
Yeah.
And
Right.
how was it to then ramp up capacity while we had that window? And much like you described in Microsoft, the industry responded.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about specifically where like Netflix and others were doing low resolution videos versus HD,
Right.
just to lower the amount of demand on the network and allow the critical services to have priority. That's the kind of thing where you've got the right balance, and it's not just because they want to throttle, they haven't even looked, but in the end of it, the ability to turn that knob is haven't really had that before.
Yes, I agree, but it was a concept used to talk about in the advisory council all the time. How can we throttle to what's important when we need the capacity?
Yeah, yeah. This is a prioritization of the things across that, whether it's computer storage or network.
Yes, exactly.
And I think, didn't the European Commission release its stimulus plan?
Yes, it did.
This week?
Yeah, they did. We can get into that in some detail if you'd like. The leaked version of it from a few weeks ago, I get a kick out of that term, by the way. The leaked version really showed that the EU was attempting to keep environmental sustainability still central so that the EU could meet its commitment of its carbon goals by 2030.
Yeah, it's really hard to unsee what's right in front of you.
Isn't it though?
When you walk outside and see a clear sky, and those are like, boy, do I really want to turn up all this pollution again? You know, and like you said, nature coming out, things. It's just pretty amazing.
Everywhere.
Yeah. So let's tell you what, let's shift gears. I would like our audience to learn a little bit more about you. You and I have known each other for more than a decade, but can you give us a background on why sustainability matters to you personally?
Yeah, sure. It's highly personal, but also professionally rewarding. As you and obviously now a number of folks on the call know, I am extremely committed to social value. I'm extremely committed to environmental topics. I understand the need for economic prosperity in balance with all that. And I'm a pretty strong student of history. And so I start to watch how these things can converge. And then what is it that we can do collectively that will provide for our vision of a sustainable future for our kids? Now, for me, a lot like you, we spend an awful lot of time in technology, right? You know, we're on this, you know, we spend a lot of time in technology. Yeah, the real marvelous, darling. And then from that perspective, whenever I want to unplug, I grew up outdoors. I grew up on the ocean. I grew up mountain climbing, hikes in the Arizona deserts. It's just a part of me. Because for me, it was a way for me to reset and reconnect.
Yeah.
Camping, it didn't make a difference, all of it. Today, I'm raising two boys. You met one of them. I don't think you met the second one. And I look at the values I extracted through those experiences. Like I said, a grounding, but as importantly, it taught me a lot. It taught me self-sufficiency. It taught me an appreciation of the environment. It taught me ways in which the human has started to disconnect in many ways, and there was an inherent need to reconnect. And my sons may not have that opportunity that I had.
Yeah.
And that challenges me. If I don't know if they have that same opportunity, then I got to figure out a way to enable that for their generation, the generations behind them. Our friend Christian had a great expression. I don't know if you remember this one. He says, "Let's not become Mars."
Yes.
Right, and it's as typical Christian, short and impactful.
Yep. And I remember you've been a dive instructor for decades, right?
Yeah. I started diving in the early '80s.
Yeah.
In late '80s, I became an instructor because I enjoyed it. For me, it was another way of reconnecting, and I wanted to share that with as many people who had an interest as possible.
Yeah.
And I've seen some pretty horrible things, quite frankly, on some of my favorite dive sites. Places that at one time were teeming with life of all kinds, shellfish, vegetation, a variety of species of aquatic life.
Yeah.
I go dive those spots today because I try to rotate them. I don't try to go to the same place, same year, that kind of thing. And as I'm finding myself going back to some of my favorite sites, they're dead. I mean, dead. There's nothing there. It's sand.
Yeah.
I'm like, am I crazy? Am I in the right spot? Of course I was. And I've seen other examples, but I think that's one that a lot of folks can relate to, and one that isn't out in front in the public's eye. What's the percent of divers out there?
Just under the water. Yeah. But the same thing is it's just the human impact on the environment itself. And so it doesn't matter, again, above the water or below the water. We seem to have that quite a bit. Well, let me ask you about the industry itself. How did you get into this? Did it pick you, or did you choose the digital infrastructure industry?
I'd like to say it was always my path, but I'd be lying. It's a little bit of both. As I mentioned, I'm a student of history, but also of technology. And if you look throughout history, you can actually put markers where there was significant technological advancement that resulted in leaps of societal value. And that's something I started to realize as early as college. And I really started to look into it. And it's in every aspect. You know, the things that we know commonly. Look at the introduction of penicillin, what that had. Look at the different forms of technologies that allowed society to expand: electricity, telephone, weaponry in major conflicts around the world. If you go throughout history, technology has had an impact on all of them. And when I started my career, it was in the IT industry, but in an industry that hadn't yet gotten that name. It was computer science back then, right? And I was working with semiconductor fabricators. I was working, and back then the wafers were like this big. I was working with clients around new forms of data capture and exchange. I'm sorry to say that back then there was no such thing as solid state.
Or cloud.
Yeah, cloud was go get an umbrella.
Actual cloud.
Yeah, exactly. And then how is that applicable to the industries, right? So that fintech, financial technologies, was in its pioneering stage. It was how is it that technology can enable greater customer access, the ATM, followed years later by mobile banking. But that came with trust, that came with security, that came with all of the ways to ensure a stable environment for those types of transactions in a way that people could have confidence in. We weren't, as an industry, paying a lot of attention to environmental impact. I'm happy to say that's all changed, and a lot of folks on this call have been a part of that. So that's kind of how I got into it, is because I had such a commitment. I had such an, I'd say, appreciation. So it was kind of natural that I found myself in the data center community, in IT. But I don't know if you know this about me. I also spent some time in hard manufacturing, hard goods, heavy industry. And why? And so this was back in the early days of CAD/CAM. It was in the early days of optimized production lines using technology at the time. Today we call that IIoT. But I wanted to figure out ways in which technology, the IT community, could amplify and accelerate productivity in the industrial sector. So I kind of had multiple phases that all came together.
Yeah, and you've done a lot of community work in this too, and I can see how this is all built back up. And I'm going to toot your horn a little bit on this because, you know, as being a part of the Green Grid and the Advisory Council, I believe that your leadership was key to the success of the Green Grid. Can you share what you took away from that experience, that community experience?
Good friends.
There you go.
Hi, Henry, as all. uh, I think there's a couple of fundamentals. And as you would know, it was really important to me to keep this core DNA to the organization.
Yeah.
It was, how is it that we leave corporate agendas to the side while we collectively collaborate, work together, challenge each other, debate each other with parity, so that we had the opportunity to collectively contribute our passions, our intellectual capital, to be able to accelerate the agenda. And we did. All right, look at PUE, you look at the data center maturity model. I still remember when Harks first presented that to us. I was like, you almost want to go, oh, look what he did. This is great. And yet it was, exactly, I heard the bells. And Harks drove this from Green Grid Europe. At the time, he was based in the UK.
Yep.
The beauty of this was we had established such a global community and trust amongst each other that we were able to accelerate that kind of work in ways that today I don't think still exist.
Yeah.
And that was my first big lesson. You get there better together as long as you're willing to respectfully debate and be able to come to a common solution. That was my first big lesson. I'd say my second lesson, which was kind of a watershed for me, was the way in which we were able to engage with governments. That hadn't happened before.
Right.
Back then, it was just lobbying. It wasn't the kind of exchanges we do today. Right? Don't get me wrong. Lobbying's got its place. God love them. Fine. But when I look at what we do, as far as building these relationships, these collaborative exchanges, that has so much value, because what we're ensuring is that what we come up with together will be practical, executable, and rather than resisted by governments everywhere, embraced, because they were actually a part of that development.
Yeah. And I saw that firsthand. I mean, we were at the White House together, those kind of sessions were really impactful, I think, just from an educational alignment standpoint. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we shift, we're both doing community work. We've been doing that for a while. And I think we've learned lessons on how to structure and drive these things. And it's been very helpful as far as, I think, being able to be successful in the efforts that are going on. And we'll talk about that within the sustainability strategy. But can you give me a summary of what you do for Schneider now? Because your role has expanded significantly.
So my responsibilities is what we call industry and government affairs. That function didn't exist at Schneider. I'd say as much as 10 years ago, just didn't exist. I was doing a lot of this type of work, engaging proactively with industry, engaging with governments, driving what I would call credible content for technical standards. And as we were pulling all this together, it occurred to me that we had a force multiplier opportunity. So in conversations with the leadership of Schneider, we agreed that this needed to be adopted throughout the company, because Schneider has such a strong commitment, and it has for years, on sustainability goals while improving operations, reducing resource consumption for our customers. So what I do is I engage with governments proactively. There's a lot of really great relationships out there. People who I trust, I hope, and I think they trust me. And it's a way in which we can exchange continuously, yet now it's adaptable and scalable to the entire company.
Yeah, and I can see how important it is now, just with the pandemic and the interfacing with governments.
Yes.
And I look at Schneider's sustainability strategy has been in their DNA for a long time, as you were just mentioning, but it's really accelerated quite a bit in the last few years. And I look at this as the 3D strategy, at least what I've seen in presentations. So digitization, decentralization, and decarbonization. Those are big words themselves, but I'd love to just double click into that strategy itself. So can you give me a picture of what is digitization? Let's start with that one.
So maybe because of our background, we understand how digital technologies can be applied in multiple industries. And Schneider is absolutely on that page. And what we do is we ensure that every service, every product that we do is keeping central the ability for interconnectivity to be in real time. We do things like remote management. We do, and this is across industries. This isn't just in the data center community.
Yeah,
it's
right.
all. So how is it that we can make energy digitally manageable? Mm-hmm. How is it that we can make consumption and supply digitally manageable? And we've got a lot of that work well underway in renewable energy production, much more effective and efficient transmission and distribution. Mm-hmm. And as you know well, an awful lot in every sector on the consumption side, always keeping that focus. And it's not proprietary. We do operate within open platforms and exchange. We have the Schneider Exchange as an example, where we share this with everyone. So that's kind of how you look at digitization.
Got it. And this, all three of these are tied together, but the next one is decentralization. And I'm not sure exactly if people understand what that means.
Okay.
From a Schneider perspective.
Okay.
So double click into that.
Sure. And to be honest with you, that's really a very exciting aspect of our work. It really is. It's one of those things that you wake up in the morning saying, what's next? And it's based upon how do you decentralize energy production in a safe, reliable, environmentally tuned way. A couple of examples. Well, before I get into that, governments around the world understand that, and they are beginning to grasp it. I've got tons of data I could share that will show the acceptance rate and the acceleration. But essentially what that means is that you've distributed your production. So rather than having a single source, your local utility or your local water treatment facility, rather than having this as a single entity that is then piped, think of high tension, piped to its consumers, what we are advocating for and having great success with is how do you create distributed energy? In our parlance, a lot of that is coming from microgrids of every scale, from the really small ones you might want to have on your home, where you would have your panels. No, we don't make the panels. You'd have your panels, you'd have your controllers, you'd have your energy storage. There are actually, and I'll use a house as the example for now, while regulations are evolving to enable that, unfortunately, most of them are still requiring the people who create that energy to pump it into the grid, rather than having an ability to store it at home and then pump their excess into the grid.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think that's going to be around for long. Most governments, as they're learning about these types of obstacles, and I understand why those regulations were created 100 years ago. It makes sense at the time, doesn't anymore. And as you look at what's happening here, governments everywhere are saying, hey, can we do this at a large scale? So we also focus on decentralization all the way up the pipe. It could be as small as a home, like I mentioned, up to a multi-megawatt enterprise, all the way up to scalable starting at 500 megawatts for an entire campus, like an airport or buildings or campuses. You look at some of the very, very large industrial production facilities around the world who are under a lot of tension right now because of the pandemic. Many of them have started to accelerate their renewable energy as a source and converting their processes from oil and gas, but to maintain the temperature they need in manufacturing, electricity. But it's electricity that has to be carbon free, because many of these large companies have made those commitments.
Right, and that's and just for the sake of time, I want to jump through a few pieces here as well, because decentralization, as you explained, now goes into decarbonization, as you were mentioning that. So I know the literal definition of it, but what does that mean when it comes down to Snyder's strategy?
In essence, it means decarbonize everything.
Okay.
You said you had short time. So it's decarbonizing everything. It's decarbonizing energy production. It's decarbonizing water utilization. It's decarbonizing heavy industry from the raw materials up through the assemblage of componentry to buildings, and the buildings in their design, in their construction, during their use phase, during their decommissioning. It's the entire life cycle of, frankly, every aspect.
Got it.
I can drill down in any one of those if you'd like, but essentially it means, how do you decarbonize energy supply, energy consumption everywhere?
Yeah, and that ties into the vision we're talking about so well, and we'll double click on that in a minute. But I am reminded here that this is an EMEA Global Member Summit, and here I'm talking to an American. Schneider is a French company, I believe, right? And we're talking quite a bit about European politicians. So, well, let's double click into what are you hearing in the EU or just overall in EMEA? Because I think there was a $3 trillion stimulus package that was just approved. Give us your take.
So that package actually has kept pure to Europe's intentions around decarbonization.
So this is the new Green Deal?
Yeah, the one that got released yesterday. It's been pumped up since the version I first reviewed. Yet at its core, it still is keeping sustainability and carbon reduction central to what it intends to do. Now, how successfully will that be deployed? That's going to take some intense management. It's going to take intense cooperation. And I've said this so many times in the past, that's why the EU is in a really good position to accelerate this agenda and demonstrate that it's both the economic and the environmental prosperity that's possible. Now, here's a phenomenon that I'm really happy to see in the Commission and throughout Brussels, even in member nation governments, is that it's not stovepiped anymore. You would have DG Energy with one agenda, you'd have DG Connect with another agenda, DG Industry in another. But what it did is it fundamentally changed the approach to policymaking, and it's wonderful. The president will no longer accept proposals that hasn't been collectively developed among multiple constituents. And the nature of the Commission has really grasped that. And I'm seeing levels of cooperation and acceleration. This is one of the reasons why I have so many early morning calls.
And I love it because the leadership that's coming out of that from a sustainability standpoint, EMEA across the board, the EU, that's what we need right now. Yes, that's the kind of thing, like you said, to keep it front and center. And this ties back into the sustainability strategy, right? The vision that we announced. And you were at both of the leadership meetings that we set up earlier this year to develop that strategy. And thank you for your contributions, because it's pretty amazing what's actually come out of it. But let me refresh everyone first. The sustainability strategy that the industry has united upon, the digital infrastructure industry, is that every click improves the future. Digital infrastructure contributes to the global economy and society without harming the planet. So, John, what does that vision mean to you?
Well, I think it would be self-serving if I said I love it. Because as you mentioned, we were all working on this together. So
it's okay, though. It's all right.
Let me put that aside. And it really comes down to, how is it that we are trying to approach this problem collectively and holistically? Right? Yeah. We're taking into account supply chain and procurement practices. As you may know, there are now many governments and industries that are saying they want lot traceability to the raw material stage to ensure that it is not only secure, but it is also environmentally conscious in its extraction and use. So supply chain is really important.
Yeah, and I mean, I look at decarbonization that you just talked about from this, the strategy, and carbon's a huge part of it. But you remember when this first started, it was every click is carbon negative.
Right.
Great, but that's not the whole story. Every click improves the future. Is so many. There's so much power in those small set of words, right? That you have to double click into all of that and unpack it and realize. This is not an easy thing to do, but that's the point of a vision.
Yes, I absolutely agree. As I mentioned before, one of the great things about working together on things like this is we're all now focused on societal value and all its interpretations. And how we do no harm. In fact, how is it that we accelerate this societal security, I guess I'll call it for now.
Yeah, especially with the pandemic. I mean, it's just so front and center right now. I don't think we could have timed this better when it comes down to uniting everybody on a common cause. So thank you for your contributions in that. And we're going to need to wrap up and just take a few questions here. But before we do that, do you have a message that you would like to share with the industry?
Yeah, for those on the line who know me, they know how I believe this but it's true. Get involved. All of us have intellectual capital and passion that we can put forward into this agenda. We all have our own networks. We all have our own personal and professional objectives. Get involved. You know, what they say is the first step on a journey is is what's going to change the direction, right? Is you take that first step. And look at all of us. There was a time we didn't know each other.
Yeah.
But when we realized we had a common interest, we started to change the landscape. But it started with taking that first step. So if I had one departing thought, it's get involved and get involved in a very flexible manner. Get involved with solving humanity's challenge.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And by the way, this is what I love about the European community just across EMEA. The flow of chats that have been flipping up on the other side here. So we're going to ask some questions. I don't even need to prompt people to do it. There's probably 50 different things that have come in here.
Oh, wow.
They're having their own conversation in the middle of us. I guess they're not listening to us.
Let me guess, Henry's involved.
So let's just very quickly, for those that have questions, feel free to throw them in here. But I'm just going to pick one of the ones that has come across. When can we extend our data center IT knowledge and process to non-digital infrastructure or support the integration of digital and physical infrastructure?
It's a great question because it's actually some of that uphill rope pushing that we're doing. Mm-hmm. Because what I'm finding is that when you really take time and establish a relationship and have meaningful dialogue, they get it quick. And then right away it's like, well, can you send me something on this? Send me something on that. So make it personal at first. Yeah. We all know the things that we've been successful with as an industry. Mm-hmm. Start. But also pull together your colleagues because now you have a force amplifier.
If you and I have learned anything in this industry is that we're better together. And, you know, if you can aggregate the work and amplify the message and get behind something like this sustainability strategy, the impact is so much bigger.
Absolutely it is. You know, look at what we're doing with the UN sustainability.
Yeah, so we're aligned with the Sustainability Development Goals. This actual vision is really a build-up to be able to say at the UN 75, what is our industry contributing? Because you know the UN is really focused on governments, right, and countries, but digital infrastructure transcends all of that. Everybody's got this. The whole world is one big platform now.
Yes.
So how do we make sure that every click improves the future? It's so fundamentally important.
Yeah, and a lot of effort went into those 17 principles. We all were involved with that, and so we made sure that they were achievable, yet aspirational, and really digitization that's going to enable it.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you, Henry Wong, for throwing in the questions here. I know we've got a ton of others on here as well. John, thank you for your time. You and I could talk for hours, but unfortunately, we got to get into the next chunk. Yeah, exactly. So thank you for joining us. And
my pleasure.
You're doing the great work you're doing. The industry and the world needs it.
Oh, thanks very much, Dean. And if you wanted me to take some follow-ups afterwards from the questions we didn't get into, I'd happily do it.
Absolutely. I think I've got 13 pages worth of chat information here. So
wow. Well, maybe not 13 pages. We'll talk.
12. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Thanks, John.
Well,
appreciate it.
All right. Take care, everybody.